NEUROANATOMY Part A. CSF circulation. Sagittal view of brain. Largest ventricle is the lateral ventricle within the cerebrum. CSF is an ultrafiltrate of blood. Most of the CSF is formed by choroid plexus in lateral ventricle. Some of the CSF is also formed in third and fourth ventricle. Foramen of Monro. It is an interventricular foramen between lateral and third ventricle. CSF formed in lateral ventricle moves through foramen of Monro, then to third ventricle, then cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, then fourth ventricle, then lower half of medulla, then continues into central canal of spinal cord. CSF also escapes from the roof of fourth ventricle through first Mejendi foramina in the midline, second Luschka foramina, one on either side of Mejendi foramen. After escaping from the fourth ventricle, CSF comes into subarachnoid space and reaches the dural venous sinus by absorption through arachnoid villi. If the flow of CSF is blocked, it can lead to hydrocephalus. Stenosis or narrowing of cerebral aqueduct can lead to internal hydrocephalus. Tuberculous meningitis or leptomeningitis can lead to external hydrocephalus. Developing brain from the front view or coronal view. Choroid plexus mostly present in lateral ventricle. The third ventricle is sandwiched between the thalamus in the upper part and hypothalamus in the lower part. Hypothalamus forms the lateral wall and floor of third ventricle. Projection fibers. Ascending and descending axons from higher brain to the lower brain contribute to form the internal capsule. The internal capsule divides the corpus striatum into two parts. Lentiform nucleus, lateral to the internal capsule. Caudate nucleus, medial to the internal capsule. Lentiform nucleus is further divided into outer putamen, inner globus pallidus. Lentiform nucleus and caudate nucleus are both part of basal ganglia. Third and fourth ventricle, sagittal section of brain. Third ventricle. It extends from the interventricular foramen of Monro to starting of the aqueduct of Sylvius. Third ventricle is a midline ventricle sandwiched between two thalami on either side. The lateral wall of third ventricle has a hypothalamic sulcus. Hypothalamic sulcus separates the thalamus above and hypothalamus below. Hypothalamus forms the lateral wall and floor of third ventricle. Floor of third ventricle. From anterior to posterior side is formed by optic chiasma, infundibular stalk or pituitary stalk from which hangs the posterior pituitary. Important information. Tuber cinereum and mammillary body both are part of hypothalamus. Tegmentum of midbrain. Roof of third ventricle is formed by fornix. Choroid plexus fornix also extends into anterior wall of third ventricle. Anterior wall of third ventricle is formed by fornix, pass anterior to foramen of Monro, anterior commissure, lateral terminalis. Posterior wall of third ventricle is formed by pineal gland, posterior commissure. Fourth ventricle. It is a diamond-shaped ventricle. It is sandwiched between brainstem anteriorly and cerebellum posteriorly. It is present between the ending of aqueduct of Sylvius and starting of central canal. Embryologically, lamina terminalis is the anterior end of neural tube. Components of hypothalamus forming the floor of third ventricle. Mammillary body, tuber cinereum, anterior to the mammillary body. Frontal and coronal view of brain showing ventricular system. Lateral ventricles, largest ventricles, C-shaped ventricles, one on either side, present in cerebral hemispheres. Roof formed by corpus callosum, separated from each other by septum pellucidum. Third ventricle, midline ventricle, connected to lateral ventricle through interventricular foramina of Monro.